Welcome to Alabama Justice Lawyering Up. My name is Richard Jaffe, the senior partner in the Birmingham, Alabama law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. We are going to explore with you the hottest cases, the most controversial topics of Alabama justice, and we're going to bring to you exciting key players that make our Alabama justice work or not work. We look forward to having you.
Welcome back to Alabama Justice. My name is Michael Hanle. I'm a partner in the law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. With me today is my partner, Michael Whisonant, and we are very pleased to welcome to our show today Senator Cam Ward. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
To start with, I'd like a little background. Tell us where you're from, how you got into politics, and what you do during the part of the season when you're not a legislator.
It's becoming a smaller and smaller part of the season. I'm the state senate from Alabaster. I represent western Shelby County, most of Chilton and Bibb County as well. Okay. I actually just do primarily contract law now. Okay. Previously, in a previous life, when I got out of law school at Cumberland School of Law, I practiced a little bit of criminal law. I was a deputy attorney general for the state, and then later went on and worked for Congressman Backus for 3.5 years before coming back, practice law, and actually getting elected to the legislature first in 2002.
Okay. I know you were born and raised down in Florida. What brought you to Alabama?
Most of my family roots are from Alabama. Okay. I was primarily from the Wiregrass, and I went to Troy University undergraduate. So that's kind of how I migrated up this way.
So you first entered into the legislature in 2002. What position what were you elected to do at that point?
Oh, I was elected to the House of Representatives. At the time, I was elected into the Republican minority in the House, where I served 8 years, including stints on the House Judiciary Committee and House Education Policy Committee. Then later in 2010, decided to run for the Senate when the Republicans became the majority. So I've served in both chambers and both in the minority and majority. I've seen each side of it.
When are you up for re-election?
2018.
Okay,
yeah.
So you'll be up for re-election with everybody else
everybody
next year.
All statewide offices and the legislature, they all run at the same time.
Okay, very good. You are currently in the Senate. You are on the Judiciary Committee?
I'm chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and serve on about 7 different standing committees, and then I'm also chairman of the Joint Oversight Committee on Prisons.
Before we get into the prison reform issue, which I'd like to address today, I know you have some special committees and organizations that you represent when you're not a legislature. If you'd like, you want to give them a plug?
Yeah, just different activities. Actually, my most recent one was I'm on the National Board of Directors for Prison Fellowship.
Okay.
I serve on the Council of State Governments. They call it the Justice Center Board, which deals with nothing but a round table of leaders around the country on criminal justice throughout the years. And then here locally, I'm on the board for the American Village, which is a great institution in Shelby County, involved with leadership Shelby County. So there's several other groups like here locally that I really enjoy being involved with.
Well, that's great. What I really would like to talk to you about is the concept of prison reform, what you've done, and how we've reached the point that we needed to do something with our prison system. So if you'll give us a little background on the problems with the prison system that precipitated this need for some reform.
Yeah, the way people talk about criminal justice has changed dramatically from really the 1980s is when it was we got to be tough on crime, and everybody wants that for public safety's sake. Starting in the late 1990s and early 2000s, people started realizing we've been pretty tough, but it really hasn't impacted crime rates, and it's costing us a lot of money. We got an overcrowded system. Well, what people discovered slowly was you were doing great at locking people up, but as a government, we didn't want to pay for it. So we love that idea, but we don't want to pay for it. And now you're faced with the reality of we have these unconstitutional conditions, and this is what really started getting Alabama's attention. You had 193% capacity in our prison system.
What does that equate to as far as people in the prison system?
You were about 28,000 people under our custody.
In a system that was built for 15 or 16,000?
Yeah, actually closer to about 13,000, okay. 13,500. So it was just there was no way to continue sustaining it. And so as people have learned more and more about criminal justice, people go back, people being the general public, they look at it and go, do I want to raise a bunch of taxes to pay for a lot of new construction? or would I prefer changing the system up to make it more efficient without harming public safety, without having to spend a lot of new money? And obviously, every time people look at it and go, I'd rather not pay a lot of taxes for prisons when you're having enough trouble raising money for schools.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what drove us to get to this point, realizing we were going to bump up on a federal court ruling if we weren't careful.
And the real concept behind all this, of course, is public safety is your primary concern, your number one concern.
First and foremost is public safety. That's the one major role government has that we've got to do right. And the system we had in place was not working, because while you were locking them up, at the end of the day in the United States, 98% of everyone who goes into the correction system anywhere in the country eventually gets out.
That's true.
And when they come out, do you want them to be a public safety risk, or do you want them to be a productive taxpayer member of society? And the way we were running corrections, it wasn't a public safety justice. It really wasn't.
We've gotten away from the concept so much, I guess, of rehabilitation, where prison systems stopped teaching people how to do a job or educating them when they're in prison. Is that part of what's...
I was just down at Draper Prison today doing a tour. I'm on the foundation board for Ingram State. Okay. Ingram State Technical College, which does nothing but provide education inside the Department of Corrections.
What we really like to do is provide some type of learning experience for the folks that are in the prison system, so when they come out, they have the ability to become productive members.
There's a notion that you have to get past on the politics, that is, somehow, some way you're being soft on crime if you talk about rehabilitation. But the old, antiquated way of saying, if I put someone in a dark room behind a fence for X number of years, then when they come out, they're going to be totally different, and they're going to be so much better than when they went in, is ludicrous. It doesn't work. Psychologists will tell you it works. Corrections officers and public safety officials will tell you it doesn't work. If you, however, make sure that person gets the drug treatment, the mental health treatment, or gets a job, there's a huge, huge chance they're not going to recidivate and come back into the system.
As far as that's concerned, is to lower recidivism rates, to give them job opportunities, what kind of things do you see on the horizon as far as what our legislature can do to help further that effort?
Well, I'll go to my meeting from just a few hours ago. Ingram State, for example, statistics show that everyone who goes into that program and gets their plumber's degree, bricklaying, welding, electrician degree, 4 out of 10 of those who get those degrees never come back into the system. And that's a huge statistic. I mean, you're seeing a huge percentage of people, if they get that GED or they get that certificate, they don't come back around and commit a crime again. They have a job, they can provide for their family. The legislature needs to support programs like that more, first and foremost. Second, you've got to figure out how to establish more mental health courts, veterans courts, and drug courts around the state. That's to catch somebody before they ever get into the system to begin with. How do you make sure if someone has a mental illness, there's a guidance to make sure they're taking their medication, they're getting the treatment they need? So the legislature needs to support these programs more than we have. And I think we're getting there, but that's a big part of how you handle a lot of folks who, if you catch them on the front end, they may never go into the system to begin with, and that's what we need.
And getting to that, you mentioned mental health, and so many of our prisoners, it seems like they have mental health issues.
Judge Thompson's ruling against us just recently, he stated that 25% or so were had a mental health diagnosis in our prisons. That number is probably much higher because our diagnosis rate is lower in the state. It's probably closer to 40% of the people in our prison have some sort of mental health diagnosis. You've got to figure out how you treat those folks. You've got to figure out what can we do to make sure this person, once they get out of the system, they're not coming back in. And that's usually some sort of supervision.
And even more so, let's see what we can do before they get to the point.
Both before now. You have some folks there now, you got to look at afterwards, what can we do to keep them straight?
Sure.
And those before they ever get there, how do you intervene and get those? And that kind of goes to the change in mental health as a whole. Mental health around the country used to be institutional. If someone was wrong with them, you just locked them up in a room, a padded room, and that was it. Now you've moved more toward community-based mental health treatment. We just don't have enough of it. And the legislature, if you're really going to put a dent long-term on public safety and prisons, mental health's the area to tackle.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk to you about maybe statewide standards for things like mental health or drug court or veterans court, because I know right now it's hit and miss as we go from county to county. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be joining Senator Cam Ward with some more questions.
I'm Richard Jaffe, senior partner in the law firm of Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight. And with me is Mike Hanle, who has handled many federal cases, among other cases. Mike, what would you do if you received a call, like you do often, from someone who believes they're a subject or a target of a federal criminal investigation?
Well, the most important thing to do is to immediately reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office to find out who is the principal U.S. Attorney that's handling that case, and you can begin to have a dialogue with that person.
And why is it important to do that?
Well, it allows us to participate in the shaping of the case, how that case will ultimately maybe be charged or not charged at all.
And what are federal sentencing guidelines?
Well, the federal sentencing guidelines are a complex series of calculations that begin with an offense level for each criminal charge, and it includes the calculation of your criminal history, which is your prior criminal conduct.
We at Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant, and Knight are ready, willing, and able to talk with you or anyone in your family at any time if you find yourself in a position where you need someone experienced in the federal courts.
Welcome back to Alabama Justice. We are joined today by Senator Cam Ward, and before we went to the break, was getting ready to ask you about some type of standards for drug courts or mental health courts or veterans courts across the state. I know here in Jefferson County we have all three of those, court systems. We have a drug court, we have a mental health court, and we have a veterans court, but that's not so with every county around the state. So how can we better that?
Yeah, there's a disparity depending on the resources of the areas. I mean, you have more drug courts. Drug courts exist in most circuits now. I'd say about 75% of your circuits, 70% have some sort of drug court. Mental health courts, much less, and veterans courts, even much less than that. There is a challenge, though, because there's a lot of disparity, again, due to lack of resources, from circuit to circuit as to how those courts are operated. I think long-term you do need to have some sort of minimum standards so that we have some more uniformity across the state and how productive and useful they are.
Is that something that we can do through the legislative process
we
or
can.
through state budgeting, or do we need some other?
We need both, but what I would like to see, too, is the legislature work with the judiciary on that.
Okay.
Work with the courts. What you don't want is the legislature creating some law saying this is how this is going to work on a minimum level, and then here court go make it work when we're not on the front line. The attorneys like yourself, the judges who are there operating those systems need to have a say in whatever those minimum standards are. And it's going to take money. You're going to have resources, but let's make sure we do it right. Let's don't pass a law and then say, now you don't know anything about it, but read it and go figure it out. We've done that on too many other issues.
Okay. We've had Judge Shante Owens on this program in the past, and she, of course, is the Jefferson County Drug Court judge, and she's talked about some of the community outreach issues with drug courts and veterans courts. We believe that's important. Is there something that is happening with the legislative process that maybe we're not aware of as far as that? No.
I mean, I think honestly because we worked on sentencing guidelines in 2013. Then we did the prison reform bill in 2015, which dealt with a lot of particularly pardon and parole and some more sentencing guideline tweaks. We've always focused on what's the state law, but I think when it gets down to community outreach, getting more people involved, that is a real the big asset is having law enforcement involved as well as having the courts involved. That's where I think your real community outreach comes in. And it's an integral part of the whole, that's a very important part.
You just mentioned sentencing guidelines. That's one of the things that drives my wife crazy is what's a person's sentence? When they say you've got a 2 to 20 year sentence, you're not going to do 20 years. How has sentencing guidelines changed the sentencing aspect in Alabama?
Well, here's a good example. Yeah, and there's a lot of folks who say, well, we should have truth in sentencing. 20 years means 20 years.
Yep.
Well, there's no state in the country that has 20 years. And the real reason, the philosophy behind that was if you had truth in sentencing, you'd just build a new prison every year. You couldn't keep up with the number of people going in. And you also have an incentive that once you've committed the crime and you're doing the time and the punishment, the incentive is what kind of rehabilitation does this person go through? If it's a remarkable rehabilitation, it may be 15 years, maybe 14 instead of 20. And a lot of folks have trouble with that, but that really is a motivator to make this person clean their act up, obviously serve the punishment, but at the same time be a productive citizen when they come back out, which eventually they will.
That's true.
That's frustrating for a lot of people. The big deal for sentencing changes was we needed uniformity. we had guidelines, but they were voluntary. So we had many circuits that were following the guidelines set by the legislature. But we had some that said, I don't care what they say, I'm going to sentence this person to that. So a good example being in Shelby County, you might get 8 years for burglary, and in Mobile County, maybe you're getting 18 years. And there was somewhat of a rise of equal protection claims of, well, how can this be? It's the same law. How can there be that disparity? So we tried to bring a little more uniformity to that and make sure it's the same across all circuits.
And what you were trying to do was, bring some standard in that would say this is the type of sentence that you should receive, and would then do it across the state.
Yeah, this is the range you need to be sentenced in for this particular crime. And I think, and there was mixed results. There's some judges who said, I don't like being told I have to do this. And
I've been in some of those counties.
Yes. And I've had some district attorneys who were very unhappy. They felt like they needed more wide-ranging latitude. What you've seen as a result is you've seen an 18% decrease in the number of people going in, and more people going to diversion programs as opposed to just the lock them up, throw away the key. And you've seen a 5% reduction in your crime rate. So the lack of people going in hasn't increased your crime rate at all over that same period of time.
That's a great result. Did the inception of the community corrections program also ease some of that as well?
The community corrections have been around for a while, long before the legislature started doing it. Actually, long before I came into the legislature. The work there, as you've seen an increase, I think we're now out of the 67 counties. I think we have 48, 49 community corrections, which are great. That's another area we're going to start establishing some minimum standards.
It was something that was in the code, in the statutes, but it just wasn't very widely used.
It is being more and more widely used, but you need some flexibility because the needs of a community corrections program in, say, Walker County is very different from the needs of a community corrections program in Jefferson County. You've got to give them some flexibility, but there's also got to be some measured results.
Okay.
And we've got to develop some guidelines on that. But again, I think we need to work with correctional officers, probation officers, and those people who are in these community corrections to give us guidance as to what's a good standard to develop.
We've talked about Judge Myron Thompson's order, which precipitated, the prison reform system that you have been instrumental in incorporating. Can you tell us about the prison reform system?
Well, Judge Thompson's order, first of all, a judge said, look, you are running, there were 3 lawsuits, one that dealt with the ADA Act, which we settled out of court. The second one is the lack of mental health services, and he ruled against us and said we ran a system that was in violation of the 8th Amendment. And so we're dealing with that ruling now, and then the next one is on the health care system as a whole for the prisoners. Judge Thompson has told us that we're going to have to, one,